Welcome everyone to this special conversation on retirement. My name is Amy Lodholz and I'm the Director of Donor Relations here. And I'm joined by my co-host, Megan Nugent. She's the Associate Vice President of Advancement at the University of Western States. We hope today's conversation can provide some guidance and insight as you think of your future and to plan for a happy, healthy retirement. Feel free to use the chat feature to submit questions. If we have time, we'll get to those before the end. I'm honored to have three very special guests with us for this discussion, who I'll introduce briefly, but then let them say more once we get started. Firstly, we have Minga Guerrero, and on my screen, she's on the top. I hope you guys can find that name there. Minga is a 1984 graduate from the University of Western States. She owned and operated a chiropractic clinic for more than 30 years while serving on several Oregon Board of Chiropractic Examiner committees. Next, we have Chuck Simpson. Hi, Chuck. Thanks for joining us. 1978 UWS graduate and also the founder of the CHP group. We also have Joyce McClure, a 1987 grad of Palmer West. Hi, Joyce. Thank you for joining us. She currently also serves as a member of the UWS Board of Trustees.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And my first question is just to kick us off with a little bit more in-depth descriptions of your career. So if I can have Joyce, if you want to kick us off and just let us know a little bit more about yourself and the business you had when you were in practice.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I was in practice for 32 years. I still maintain an active license here in Oregon and inactive in Washington State. And I do occasionally see a patient, but I am no longer full-time practice as I was. I had various different opportunities in practice. I started out as an associate working with another doctor and kind of learned the ropes for about 5 years. I then moved out of state and I did a lot of locum tenens work in Washington State, and then ended up moving back to Oregon in the Beaverton area and practiced there for about 10 years. And then my last 16 or 17, I was in Multnomah Village, which is still Southwest Portland near I-5. Most of those practices were in one way or another multidisciplinary, and the last practice I had co-leasing with me a naturopath, an acupuncturist, and another DC who practiced quite differently from me. So there were 4 full-time practitioners in the space, plus we had massage therapy as well. And I sort of ran one half of the building and then the other doctors shared the other half. We had on my half of the building 7 employees. Most of them were mostly part-time, although we had, my office manager obviously was full-time. And practice was pretty middle of the road, I would say, diversified, a lot of different techniques in there, some activator. And we incorporated massage therapy, both in the treatment with the patients, as well as physiotherapy modalities, and also standalone massage therapy, which patients either could see on their own direction or in conjunction with their chiropractic care. I loved practice, and looking forward to retirement was a big mental challenge for me, but I'm happy I'm here.
Great. Thank you so much, Joyce. Minga, can you tell us a little bit about your career?
Sure. I had a practice in Gresham, Oregon, although I started out with a little home office in 1984 in Laurelhurst. I was renting a house there. It was gigantic, and I was lucky enough to have the whole house to myself with just one other roommate. So I had a practice there for about 2 years. And then I moved out to Cascade Athletic Club and had a practice with another doctor. After about 5 years, I went out on my own and got a little clinic in Gresham started. And during the course of my time at that clinic, I had 4 to 6 employees pretty much all the time. It fluctuated a little. Sometimes there were other chiropractors, acupuncture, massage therapy. I should say also, I had a massage license for a little while when I first, during the time I was a student. And then I gave that up when I became a chiropractor because there's no need. It's covered, so it didn't matter. During the course of my career, I practiced Gonstead, Diversified, Activator, SOT, several different things. And I kind of settled on, in my later years, SOT and Activator with very little Diversified. And then, of course, I went into all sorts of things in the community, director of youth ministries at the church I attended. I was a yoga instructor at Cascade Athletic Club for almost 20 years, and that was a lot of fun. And I retired from active practice about, 6 or 7 years ago, but I then became a medical director with the CHP group. And it was very hard on me to leave practice. I think we'll talk about that a little later, but it was due to an accident that I suffered. So I really had to change the way I was doing things. And so I went into things I could do that were still chiropractic that I absolutely loved. And now I am almost entirely retired, other than I still do, I teach webinars on various subjects for CHP group, and volunteer work with University of Western States. And I guess that's about it for me.
Great, thank you, Minga. Chuck, can you just let us know a little bit about your career?
Yeah, I started out life as a child, and then I became a chiropractor. By the way, it's really great to see all of these familiar faces. Nice to see you all in this remote format. I had an undergraduate degree in liberal arts in anthropology and English, which doesn't seem like such a great lead into a chiropractic career, but actually it stood me in great stead throughout my professional life. I had enough chemistry and mathematics to get all of the science under my belt to get into Western States back in the day, but it was really that background in the liberal arts that informed my chiropractic practice all along. I had the great good fortune of associating with a well-established doctor early in my career, and for 25 years had a treating practice in Cornelius, which is a far west suburb of the Portland metro area. When we first moved to Cornelius, it was a logging and mill town, slowly undergoing the change to what ultimately became a heavily nursery farming dependent community right adjacent to the high-tech industry. And so the patients that came through our office were everything from folks straight out of the mountains in Guatemala, injured on the job and needing chiropractic care, to multi-zillionaire electronics types coming in right side by side with these other folks. So it was a multicultural experience to practice in Cornelius. I did that for 25 years. Along the way, became a chiropractic consultant doing independent medical exams, working in the medical legal arena around malpractice kinds of issues. And so those two pieces of my practice continued pretty much throughout the duration of my practice life. I stopped seeing patients in about 2004. And for the final 10 years of my practice life, I was the medical director at the CHP group. Moving to that kind of a management role was probably one of the biggest challenges that I experienced as a chiropractor, changing the focus from every patient one at a time through the office, in the treatment room, and out the door, to thinking about it more in terms of populations of patients, populations of practitioners, and trying to influence the way chiropractic was delivered to thousands and thousands of patients. So it was a real transition from very much patient-centered, directed kind of an approach to something that's a little more broadly based in terms of healthcare management. It was a great win for me in that I was able to continue working long after the tendonitis in my elbows finally settled down after stopping seeing patients, and was able to continue to leverage the instruction that I had gained at Western States back in the day, for which I'm very grateful.
Great, thank you so much, all of you. My first real question is for Minga. You had mentioned in our interviews with you that you were a first-generation college student. How did that impact your career decision and your retirement plan?
Thank you. And I'm also want to say hi. Now I'm seeing names of people out here. Oh my gosh, some of you I haven't seen in so long. Hi, Steve. I feel like the romper room lady here. Hi, Christine. Hi, Daniel. I'm like, hi, everybody. I have to say I had some of my goals were established early on because my father was a big influence in my life for planning ahead. But some of the things just happened by pure happenstance and luck. And so the first goal I had was to pay off my student loans. And with that in mind, I spent pretty much the first decade in practice building my business. And my advice to anybody who's looking to retire is get your business solid on the ground first. And I developed a pretty healthy referral business. And by the 5th or 6th year, I didn't really have to do any more advertising. All my referrals generated, and I could really relax and enjoy my practice. So with that in mind, I started teaching yoga classes I was inside Cascade Athletic Club at the time with my business. And the classes brought a lot of people. Plus, I just loved doing yoga and had done it. I was certified as a yoga instructor for, probably 10 years before I was a chiropractor. My second goal was to own a home. My father was big on that because coming from Mexico, the American dream would be to own a home. So once I paid my student loans off, my plan was to have my house paid off by the time I was 65. And that was accomplished. That was wonderful. By pure happenstance, I volunteered for the Oregon board, and I would recommend any new students or anybody who's even out there who's put a little bit of time in with your career to look at volunteer work, either on state board committees, at the university, areas where you can learn things about the business that you might have never known before. My later years became much more successful because of having that in my repertoire. And it allowed, I was searched out. I never really told CHP this, but I got job offers from many hospitals all across the United States. And it's because they just look up and see who's been on a state licensing board, who's had a job as a medical director, and they start trying to recruit you. I obviously didn't go anywhere else because I wanted to stay here. Then I developed webinars about, I think, my 15th year because my father said you need some passive income also, and that will help you not work as hard. And my final thing that I did was to get a financial planner, and I highly recommend that for anyone because it makes a huge difference. I never learned about stock markets or how to manage money. And so I was quite intimidated by all of that. And I was even afraid to go to a financial planner because I thought, how can they even help me? I was struggling, and it was difficult because I was supporting many of my family members. My family worked hard so I could attend college, and in return, I helped them. And so I wasn't able to save as much money maybe, but eventually by having a financial planner and having him work the stock market, it was incredible how successful and how much it helped me out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Minga.
So our next question is going to be for all the panelists. Tell us a little about the opportunities and challenges that arose during the process of your retirement. If you transitioned your practice to someone else, share how that experience was for you and how you found the right person. We want to give each panelist 2 to 3 questions to answer that topic, and we'll start with Joyce.
Okay, well, you were wanting to know about opportunities and challenges. Sorry, I'm just kind of rephrasing the question.
Okay, yeah.
One of the things I did in practice was I found as I was sort of maybe 10 years in, and then again, probably at 16 or so and 20, I found myself becoming a little bit blasé or a little bit burned out maybe. So those were opportunities that I kind of jumped on other things. So for example, as Minga and Chuck also, I ended up serving for the state board, the regulatory board, for both on the peer review committee and then as a board member. And I learned so much about practice from seeing what other doctors were doing, and sometimes doing very badly. And sometimes I thought, I could improve that myself. So that was a really good challenge. And then I decided that I wanted to learn more just about how to serve my patients better. So I entered the diplomate program and did a diplomate in rehabilitation, which was great. That really kind of brought my practice up to more current function and kind of what people expect nowadays. Helped me do better for my patients and give them more opportunities to help themselves. So that was really rewarding. As I started thinking ahead to retirement, I hired a couple of associates, and I had some good, some neutral, and some not so good experiences with that. So, I think the take home for me in that experience, particularly because I was thinking ahead at the time I started bringing in an associate, I was thinking, I think I'll bring in an associate and then they can work alongside me. And then eventually they can take over more of my practice, and then I can sell my practice to them, which I think a lot of people think that makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't. So I think it's always that begin with the end in mind. I would have been better served to have had help much earlier on from somebody who does practice transitions, to kind of go in with a little bit more concrete plan, which eventually I did toward the end. And when I really truly was ready to retire, that 2 years beforehand, I really kind of got myself in gear, really looked at the practice from an objective standpoint, and was able to effect a really, I think, smooth transition, and that worked out well. But those associate things along the way, although they were great additions to the practice, the patients loved them, they always were helpful, it really was not the road to transitioning into retirement that I had initially envisioned.
Thank you, Joyce. Minga?
I had a similar experience as Joyce. I have to admit, I did go through a couple of associates, and I think it started about my 15-year burnout time where I was exhausted and I really wanted help. And like Joyce, I also thought, oh, this will be great. I'll get them all, trained and helpful. And it did not work out that way. And yeah, I had the good, the bad, and the ugly as well with that experience. But I eventually I did eventually learn how to pick associates a little better and learn how to tighten up the contract. So I highly recommend anyone who's going that route to seek out advice from others and make sure your contracts are really good and the people that you are looking for. And like Joyce, being on the licensing board helped me understand that you never want to associate with someone unless you check out their credentials through the licensing board. I was going along pretty well and had a couple of associates working with me, and in addition was going full-time when I was I think I was about 62, and I was also looking at joining CHP group then, so I was going to work just 2 days a week there, 3 days a week at my office, and then I had full-time people running the office. I was going to make bank. It was great. And then I was in a really bad car accident, which derailed me and broke my jaw and ruptured discs in my neck. And I ended up going through a couple of neck surgeries, 2 of them in less than a year. And it really made me realize I could not return to practice very easily. And it was even difficult to do some of my speaking engagements with the jaw broken. But I healed up pretty well from all that, except I could not go back to practice. And lucky for me, the person I hired, the last associate I got, I decided to choose someone who was similar to me in gender and practice style. And they were maybe 30 years younger. So it was a wonderful new graduate. And I just tailored a loan so that they could afford the purchase. And I made it be as simple and easy as a transition as I could. And I was able to step away, and I have to say that person has done such a good job. She's such a good fit, and she's carried on the clinic that I put my heart and soul into. So it was just it's been a wonderful thing.
Thank you, Minga. Chuck?
I've heard it from both Minga and Joyce, but the key in moving that practice onto another generation of practitioners is really the piece that is most difficult to achieve. You can have contracts, they can be airtight, you can have all kinds of agreements, but the philosophy has got to be there. And that's probably one of the most difficult things to assess. I was very lucky in that I was practicing with a fellow that I had been practicing with for 20 some years. And when it came time for me to step away, it was really easy to transfer the patients over to my associate. At the same time, I was integrating the other aspects of my practice life, the consulting, medical, legal work, and the healthcare management that I was doing at CHP. They were all kind of coming together at a time when I really had to pick and choose about the amount of energy that I was able to devote to one or another. The good news was I really had the opportunity to establish something of a glide path over a period of several months, where I was able to talk to my patients and say, look, I'm eventually going to be stepping away from this, and you'll be moving over to this other doctor. You've probably already been treated by him. You certainly have known him as long as you've known me. And in terms of my comfort level with passing my patients off to a known commodity, that was really a key ingredient in kind of easing the pain of passing my patient population on to another doctor. The other piece of it was, though, the opportunity to kind of establish a gradual transition out of regular full 5-day-a-week practice to, in my case, I did it down to 3 days and then 2 days and then 1 day a week over a period of about a year. So it wasn't just waking up on Monday and not going to work. It was a gradual process of moving my time away from the practice and into the other things that were taking increasingly the amounts of time and energy in my life. The other thing that I have done that was interesting to me along the way was to volunteer at Western States. I did some volunteer teaching at a couple of classes over a period of time, and it was really a great opportunity for me to see the incoming generation of chiropractors. And I got to tell you, I was really impressed with the energy and the intelligence and the dedication of this cadre of folk that were going through the Western States program at the time that I was doing a little dog and pony show about how to write a good narrative report. Kind of boring, mind you, but I have heard since then that folks took away some valuable lessons from those interactions. And it was a great opportunity for me to get a little more insight as to what was going on at the teaching institutions. And that kind of by accident led to becoming more involved with the Council on Chiropractic Education, first as a site visitor. And over the 8 years or so that I worked as a site visitor, I was able to visit about 8 different chiropractic programs across the United States and had largely the same kind of reaction. Boy, these folks are really serious about educating chiropractors. It was really a rewarding experience to see how the dedicated teaching staffs at the various chiropractic colleges around the country were really working to produce the kinds of chiropractors that we're all proud to be associated with. So that was one of the most important advantages and opportunities that I had that really had nothing to do with seeing patients, but had everything to do with my work in chiropractic. And I really appreciate that opportunity over time. It's been a great help for me to have a lot of confidence in this profession going forward.
Thanks, Chuck. Joyce, I wanted to ask you before we get too far ahead, I know that you had commented on using a medical practice consultant when you sold your practice. Could you speak on that briefly?
Yeah, sure. So when I was thinking ahead to retirement, I realized that there are a whole array of options from, I could have managed the practice and just hired some associates and not even had any patient contact, but been the clinic director, so to speak. Anyway, I think I'm trying to remember all the other options. Anyway, there were quite a few different things. And part of part of what I ended up doing, actually, there were two things. One is I worked with a counselor who's a PsyD, whatever, anyway, a person who's a professional mental health counselor, because part of the process is really figuring out what is it that works for me? What do I want out of this business that I've built up over these decades? And then the other part was looking at my practice and trying to figure out, how do I make this practice something that somebody else would want to buy, number one, and that somebody else who my patients would want to connect with. So it was really useful to look at the practice much more dispassionately, because I think we all are people, we connect with people, we spend a lot of time because we see patients over and over again, we develop one-on-one relationships with them. So it matters who is going to be stepping into your shoes and continuing that relationship. It matters to the patient and it matters to us. And so it was helpful to talk to somebody, and I talked to Jim Bowen. That's who I ended up sort of connecting with. Partly I started with him just to try and get the mechanics of the practice solid so that it was turnkey for somebody else to come in and take over, and that there weren't any weird little dark corners that were going to look ugly when they were illuminated, you know. But also it was helpful to talk to him because he helped me also strategize about what my path might be to exiting the practice, whether it be hiring somebody or, you know, all these various myriad options, things I hadn't even considered. So I think kind of the two of those pieces really helped me together quite a bit. And also to see, you know, what is the practice worth? I had no idea. It's really hard. There's not a lot of, you know, templates out there to say your practice is worth $50,000 or $500,000. I mean, you know, how do you know? So having somebody walk me through looking at the numbers, how to sort of figure out, you know, what's my salary? So if I step out and somebody buys a practice, what are they going to be able to pay themselves so that it makes sense, so that they can also pay for the practice and over what period of time, those kind of things. So that was money well spent, I have to say, for that. And it took a period of time. I think we worked together for 10 months probably. And then because of that relationship and the time that we spent together, he actually knew somebody who also was looking to buy another practice, and it just clicked and it went through really quickly. And that maybe wouldn't be how it works out for everybody, but in our case, that was excellent. So
thank you, Joyce. So
See,
now I have a question for you. Oh yeah, please.
I wanted to echo something that Joyce said, because I had not thought to mention this. I did the very same thing. I had hired 2 practice consultants, 2 different ones, and again, also spent the better part of 9 to 10 months going through things with them. That is a very valuable tool for anyone looking to sell their practice. Had I not done that, I would never have known that there's more than just the nuts and bolts of your practice. And this is why I tell young doctors, or even people who are halfway through their career, start diversifying your practice to have other things than just the practice. And I didn't realize that by having a referral network of hospitals, local, I went to so many local physicians in the area and had referrals. I also had educational classes that were established, CA training classes, all sorts of things that I could teach the new person. I just handed my curriculum over to the new person so they could then begin teaching classes that I had done on a regular basis. And then I instructed them, I had them attend some of my classes, the new doctor, and that way it helps them have more than just the practice for sale. And so there's, besides the cost of the practice, you can add in extra fees when extra when you sell it, that includes things that are passive, that are generated by the practice.
Yeah, thanks, Minga. So I have a question for you now, Chuck.
Okay, go ahead.
Did you?
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in quick there. You know, it seems like you've sort of scratched the surface of a number of different seminar topics going forward: how to organize the practice sale, how to bring in associates, how to arrange the financing, how to do financial planning that makes sense for an individual practitioner. I mean, that's really a key ingredient of this whole retirement scenario, is being able to retire and continue to have an income, or at least a revenue stream that keeps you alive. So, I think there's a whole lot of meat there for future sessions to be had, either among this group or some others. But it's really clear that it's a struggle that we all had in moving along. The one big thing that came to my mind was when I finally stopped seeing patients. And it took me several months to realize that, good grief, I'm depressed. And it took me a while to sort of figure out what was going on. And I think what I finally figured out, not with the help of a counselor, but just on my own, is that when you're in practice, the reward structure is absolutely unique. It is every day, every patient, the kind of feedback that lets you know how you are doing, good, bad, or otherwise, but it's right there. And when that goes away, you lose that sense of connection to what's going on in your life on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's a big piece of moving away from an active practice into some other world, whether it's retirement, or in my case, I moved into a management kind of scenario where the reward structure is entirely different from what it's like when you're seeing patients one at a time in the office.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that. Your retirement journey is unique. You were able to shift to a completely different career. So what advice might you have for full-time practitioners considering an alternate or adjacent career path as a way to retirement?
I think there is a lot of opportunities. It's been mentioned already about the integration of chiropractic into other clinical and medical settings. I think there's a lot of opportunity for chiropractors now to practice in settings that were just totally unrealistic when I first started practice. When I graduated Western States, the model was you went out, you rented a space, you hired a CA, you bought an X-ray machine, and you started seeing patients. Anymore, that model of practice is increasingly difficult to pull off financially, but it's also not really the way that practice is going. And to be able to open up to other kinds of clinical relationships, so that the chiropractic word can be spread into other kinds of settings. In my case, I had an opportunity to develop some skills in the medical management area. I took some very specific and explicit coursework in medical leadership, and that was a real change from where I had come as a trained clinician in the chiropractic realm. So if there is interest in becoming something other than a practitioner, seeing yourself as some kind of clinical manager, quality manager, utilization manager, is to go out and find those kinds of trainings that can help get you into that sphere of thinking. It's much different from the typical kind of orientation that you have to have as a practitioner. And so it's not for everybody, but it has a lot of value. And from my own personal perspective, it moves you from thinking about patients one at a time through the front door, through the treatment room, to thinking about patients in terms of populations and in terms of the numbers of folks that you can have an impact on across the population.
Thanks, Chuck.
Can I just sort of jump in a little bit there? I wanted to kind of echo what Chuck was saying, that it's a huge transition going from that day-to-day patient contact to potentially a vacuum. And that was one of the things that I was strongly advised by many people to consider. And I am a very project-driven person. I like goals. I'm really good at handling lots of details, which I think is part of what makes me good at business and managing all these little things that go on in practice aside from just your patient. I mean, you have to have a plan for your patient treatment, but you've also got to have a plan for how the patient information is going to flow through the office, and how's the billing going to be handled, and who's going to follow up on that, and how do you manage your staff scheduling. And I mean, there's a myriad of things we all know.
Mm-hmm.
So going from that to being at home with nothing to do is a bad idea. So I made sure that I had a big project ahead of me. So I had a little apartment remodel, creation thing that I did. And then also a big family trip out in Europe planned for sort of that next 6-month period. And that was a godsend, because it meant that once I had my boohoo day, which was the very first day after I sold my practice, and I didn't go in to see any patients, and that was pretty blue. And then the next day was a little bit better, and then it just kind of went uphill from there, and it was a lot better. But I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge and prepare for.
You guys actually just stole my thunder. That is my next question, is specifically talking about the kind of the mental emotional part of it. That was something that Amy and I were both struck by when we talked to the three of you. Was that all three of you mentioned the emotional aspect of retirement. So what did you learn about yourselves while going through this process, and how can you mentally prepare for this process? And so I'd like to kick that off with Minga, if you can talk a little bit about that.
It might have been a little different for me, because I didn't really have the luxury of planning a slow exit. The accident happened and rather abruptly. I just had to I tried to work 1 or 2 days a week. It was very intense. I didn't realize how hard it would be. I thought, well, I could just wait till I have my surgery. Even though my jaw's broken, I can talk all day. It didn't really work out. And so I did have, it was tough because I was disabled to the point I could not practice. And so I lost what I loved doing like that. And lucky for me, I was able to find the associate real quick and get someone in there. I was also fortunate enough to have had job offers. CHP had been courting me a little bit and asking me to work for them. And so it worked out that I was able to go into work very quickly. It was a huge change, as Chuck said. Now, I was not doing what he was doing administratively, but I already had been doing webinars, and I loved creating educational programs. And before I was a chiropractor, I was going to become a high school teacher, a school teacher. And so I always loved teaching. I did 3 years of education, almost got my degree, and then I switched to chiropractic, but that's another story. So it was very fun for me at CHP. It allowed me to get my feet back on the ground, and I might have had more than what most people have to do. So Joyce said, you make sure you have a plan of something. I didn't have a plan, but I had the 2 neck surgeries. I had to quickly sell my home in Gresham. I got married. I moved to a new location. So I was supremely busy. And then, when I finally retired, COVID-19 hit. So everything kind of just was thrown at me. It was very hard not to work and not to have that daily constant feeling of taking people's pain away. And lucky for me, I have 9 siblings and all sorts of relatives who always want their back treated. And so I still have occasion to give treatments to family and to my sweet husband. And that kind of helps me feel like I'm still taking pain away. But it is something that I think everyone has to understand. When you leave the practice, whether it's abruptly or planned over time, it's really important to take care of your mental health and to understand that things are going to be different, and you have to find ways to engage with the world that still gives you that feeling that you have as a healthcare provider.
You're muted, Megan.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Minga. Thanks, Minga. Joyce, you're next.
Okay. Well, I really have a couple things. I think I've already kind of touched on the primary concern for me, and that worked out really well, that I was able to plan and be busy, and I really benefited from a counselor going, for me personally, that just worked well. I have somebody I like, I trust. She's older than me and experienced. And the other thing I did, I think that was really, really helpful for me was I talked to older people in my sphere of influence or people that I knew. And I just said, how was retirement for you? What did you do? What were your experiences and recommendations? And that was so helpful. And it actually, it makes me just a little emotional actually, because they were so encouraging and they said, you're going to love retirement and don't worry about it. And, it was great to work and it was also great to step away. So that has proven to be very true. I'm super happy being out here on my acreage and puttering around in the garden and fixing this and all these little projects I had stacked up. I'm actually working through and feeling that's where I get my goodies now is, oh, I just fixed this little gadget, whatever it is. And look at that, isn't it pretty? So, but I wanted to, and maybe we'll circle around at the end. I had one other comment I wanted to make about finding the right doctor for your practice takeover. So Megan, should I do that now or do you want to wait till later?
Amy, do you want to leave that for a little bit at the end?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll leave that to them, but we'll make a note of that. Thanks, Joyce.
Yep.
Chuck, can you answer a little bit about kind of that emotional part of that? You've talked a little bit about it, but if you can go into a little bit more depth.
Yeah, and I think, like I mentioned, it was really a change in the reward structure, and not just the monetary reward, but sort of the implicit value that you get from the work that you do on an hour-by-hour basis. That really changed when I stopped seeing patients. It was a surprise to me how much of my identity was tied up in that piece of the reward of helping people along their health journey. I don't think I really thought about it until it was after the fact, and it kind of dawned on me that, boy, that was a big part of what I was doing. And I think it would be a real help for practitioners in general to be aware of that and to be cultivating that part of themselves as they're going through their practice lives, so that when they come to the end of it, there's more of a recognition about what it means when that goes away. I also had the opportunity to have my practice jerked out from under me when I was involved in a head-on motor vehicle collision 2/3 of the way through my practice life. I had a fractured sternum, had a hell of a time doing anything to do with manual adjusting. I just couldn't do it. And it was a real wake up to me in terms of, this is really a delicate skill that we have learned as chiropractors. And you got to have a lot of physical capacity to bring it off. And like I say, I had tendonitis in my elbow for 20 years that I could never get rid of until I stopped adjusting patients. So it was real clear that there was a task and a test on my body from just the physical aspects of doing what I was doing every day with patients.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because I see the common thread with all three of us having had a significant accident that took us out of practice right now. And for me, it was a motor vehicle accident when I was in my 5th or 4th year of practice. So I was clicking along really happily as an associate with another doctor who I greatly esteemed. And this happened and I had to call in and say, I'm sorry, I can't come into work this afternoon. And it took me 9-10 months to get through that. So I eventually started up seeing patients gradually at my home, and then ended up, I think that was when I ended up moving out of state and doing the locum tenens work. But that was, maybe that did help to inform my planning part of, I've got to make sure I can take care of myself and set money aside. And, it probably helped me get to retirement more functionally than I might otherwise have.
Great. So Joyce, this question is specifically for you, and you've touched on this a couple of times, but I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about the work you did with a counselor as you were transitioning to retirement. Can you just share a little bit more about that and other advice that you might have for people experiencing this transition?
Yeah, well, I think pretty much she just challenged me to envision what options were there for me. What would, if I take away this big part of my life that, you know, maybe I saw patients X number of days a week, but then there's all the other things incident to practice that take up your time outside of the office. So what was I planning to do instead? Because, you know, she knows me, I'm somebody who likes to be busy and engaged and whatnot. So I think that was one thing. One of the things that I did also prior to, sort of coincident with deciding that I was going to retire from practice and maybe nudged by it, was our landlord at the office we were leasing informed us that they were going to raise our rent 50% at our renewal. And that was a huge shocker. And then one of my co-lessors, one of the other doctors in the office, was at that time ready to retire. So that meant not only was I going to have to take on a much bigger nut, but also replace that income stream or somehow fill that space at a time in my life when I really wasn't looking to expand. So she had me get these big sheets of paper. They're, you know, like the kind you use on the boards when you're doing a lecture, or you used to before people had smart technology, but just big pieces of paper. And I had a big piece of paper for each scenario. And I was looking at different office locations, and I was looking at different associate buyout, or me taking over, or me just being a solo, you know, really low key practice, one person, one staff person, and just write everything down on that one piece of paper that comes to mind, sort of kind of a workflow or a thought flow process or whatever. And it was really helpful because I could think about stuff and I could put it away, and I could come back and I could add something else, and I could highlight something, and I could have floor plans, you know, taped on there, and look at, you know, how many massage therapists could I have, and where's my office manager going to be, or do I want to do this, or anyway. That was a really good concrete task for me, and I could just roll it up and stick it away, and then I'd have a few more hours and I'd pull it out and look at it some more. And I really worked with those off and on in different formats for months. Super useful. I think that was probably, in terms of the actual practical things I did, probably one of the best.
Great, thank you so much.
So with the last few minutes of our event tonight, I know this is a big topic and there's a lot to share. So there may have been things that you wanted to highlight or you didn't get a chance to really touch on. So with the last few minutes, I encourage you to share any other words of wisdom or pieces of advice or comments that you have on this topic. We'll start first with Chuck.
Thanks. I hope this has been useful. I am looking around at the attendees, and they're mostly at the retirement end of this spectrum, but I also see that we have a lot of folks that are involved in chiropractic education, either as administrators or board members or others that are interested in the kinds of chiropractors that we're churning out today. And I'm just a little bit curious as to how the chiropractic training programs talk about this kind of an issue. Most of the focus is on cranking out a new practitioner who can get out and be successful in practice, and then what? And so my thought would be a practice management curriculum that would really focus on the entire span of a chiropractor's practice. Because I think what you've heard is, you know, the initial phases are really, you know, how am I going to be able to make enough money to pay my student loan back? And by the way, how do I get an associate in to get my practice expanded? All of these things are really focused on keeping the practice going. And it's not until you come up against that notion of, you know, I just simply can't do this forever. I've got to get out and make that transition. You know, those are some topics that I think could really be of value to new providers, rather than waiting for us old folks to come around and say, well, this is how I did it, and this is how I did it. My guess is there's probably some evidence out there that would really help us all as a profession to develop these kinds of skills early on.
Thanks, Chuck. Joyce?
Well, two things, and they're really on sort of different areas. One is, I found that when I sold the practice, collecting the accounts receivable it's kind of an emotional process. So if I had a recommendation, it would just be to consider doing the accounts receivable collections yourself, because you're the person the patients have a relationship with. And if they're going to pay anybody, they're going to be much happier if they think it's going to the doctor who provided the work than somebody they don't know or don't like as much. So I think that that's just kind of a value situation that you might consider. And the other thing is, with that transition of finding somebody to buy your practice, if that's what you're planning to do, or just step in and, you know, transition away. My opinion is you're never going to replace yourself. You cannot clone yourself, and you have a relationship with your patients that is built on your personality and your time that you spend with them. And you cannot pluck somebody out of you know, a pool of interested chiropractors and plunk them in and hope that they're going to be you. They will not. So you have to figure a way to let go of that notion and look for a doctor that you respect, that you think has good skills, that you respect their judgment and their clinical decision-making, that you can wholeheartedly say to your patients, I know this person is not going to be me, and I would choose to have them treat my family. I think they've got a great head on their shoulders. They're, you know, the way they do things may be a little different from what you're accustomed to, but you know, sometimes it's good to have a second set of eyes on your case, whatever the lingo is you need to do. But that's the work and that's the art in making a successful transition, in my opinion. And that's all.
Thanks, Joyce. Minga, any last words?
Yeah, there were a couple things Joyce said that I think I might add in on my practice sale. Two things. You can either choose to work the books like Joyce suggested. Also, the new doctors, if it's a new doctor, they often need working capital. You can fold the receivables into the working capital for the new doctor and have that be part of the money they pay you as well in the total price of the sale. The other thing that I thought about talking about right now is UWS did something a few years ago that I don't know if it's been repeated, but I thought it was extremely valuable. They called me occasionally to do lectures at the university, and so I volunteer for this work. And one of them was leadership roles in chiropractic. But that particular talk evolved into career pathways in chiropractic by showing young doctors how they might process their career. In other, like what I said, your first 5 to 7 years is just pedal to the metal, get your business off the ground, then volunteer work, then developing passive income strategies, basically diversify what you do. And that particular class was a lunch and learn thing. And I'm trying to remember, I think there were 50 or 60 people showed up for that. It was on campus back pre-COVID days, but I thought it was really helpful. And I got a lot of feedback from students saying, so if any of you here are administrators from other schools or have access to help students, I think having classes that show them career pathway potentials, and that is very helpful. I don't recall getting that in my education, but I'm an 84 grad and I don't fault the university for that because I love the education I got and I think it's wonderful. But I think having some kind of career leadership type, class or even just a lecture could be helpful. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes left. I'd encourage any audience participants to submit questions in the chat box. I have a few questions I've collected from other interested parties. I'd be happy to ask a few of those.
There's also one in the chat, Amy.
Excellent. Kathy, I believe Kathy Thomas asked that. I think she's looking just a little bit more input on how to really hire an associate right. She says she's been 20 years in the business and she owns her own practice. She's 53. She has an opportunity to hire an associate, but she really wants some good advice on how to make sure to do it right.
I think she actually says she has an opportunity to be associate at an established clinic.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, because she's considering it to get rid of the headache. Advise. She has to be an associate, not to hire an associate.
Yes. Thanks.
I would like to offer a little word on that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think the number one thing before you go associate anywhere, go on the state board website and look the doctor up and see, what's going on there. You also might want to find out, have they had any complaints from insurance companies? When you associate yourself with someone who has a lot of insurance complaints, it kind of red flags you, and there could be potential that just by associating with that person, you will then be followed, more scrutinized more heavily. So I think looking at the practice that you're going into is very important to make sure that you're associating with someone that you might enjoy associating with.
I could offer a little insight on that too, because I've had a couple different associate positions where I was an associate, and then I went from that situation and started my own practice. And I mean, for some years I thought, I was making just as much money or more working for somebody else than I am for my, and fewer hours than I am with my own practice. But I think it's a matter of how much you value being in control of all the facets of your practice, because if you work for another doctor, then you're under their practice protocols and their paradigm, whatever their philosophy is, you need to adopt to be part of that practice. So one thought could be that you could go and work there for a couple days a week for several weeks and just see how it feels to you. And then maybe you would have, even if you volunteered to do some vacation relief for them or something, maybe that would give you an opportunity to kind of test it out, try before you buy. But yeah, there's definitely some pros and cons, and they're not all bad.
Great idea, Joyce.
Yes, thanks, both of you. Chuck, do you have anything you want to add, or do you think that Minga and Joyce?
Not specifically on that topic. I guess the only thing that I would kick in, just that I haven't heard so much yet, is the notion of lifelong learning. It's really a piece of professional development that sticks with you even when you move away from actively being in practice. I haven't stopped reading the literature. I haven't stopped looking at the stuff that's coming out. The things that I held as gospel during my practice life have, a lot of them, been very significantly challenged by new information. And keeping that going, I think, is one way of staying engaged with the profession even long after you've stopped being an active practitioner. That whole notion of lifelong learning, I think, is something that's going to keep me going from here forward.
Ooh, good idea, Chuck. Good comment.
Well, I think that concludes our discussion with 1 minute to spare. Thank you so much to our panelists for your wisdom and your expertise and your honesty. It's been really fun hosting this event with Megan, and it is being recorded. So if you have friends or colleagues that you'd like to share this discussion with, we'll be sending out a link to everyone. I do also want to encourage the discussion to continue on our Switchboard platform. That's a space that's for our alumni and friends. And if you have questions about retirement, you can connect with our panelists. We'll be sharing their email addresses on the screen in just a moment. You can open a dialogue on the Switchboard discussion panel. And of course, Megan and I are here to help you connect to UWS and anything that you might need from the university. So thank you again. We'll be sharing a link. Anything else for the good of the order, Megan?
No, I think that's great. We're just really glad you guys could all be here. It's been so lovely to have this conversation and to meet everyone and to have you guys hopefully walk away with this for some great information.
So you'll see if you're interested in reaching out to our panelists for more detailed questions or dialogue, they're here for you. They volunteered to share their contact information. So thank you all. And we hope to see you at our next event in person.
Yes, hopefully. And always remember, Amy and I are also here if you need anything from the UWS team. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.